Welcome back to this reading of Auralia's Colors. We are up to chapter 6, a brief half apology. It has been several days, maybe several weeks since I read the last chapter. And if you're discovering these all at once, then there's no problem. But if you've been following these as I roll them out, so to speak, there's been a gap, and I apologize for that. The reality is that, we are, most of us, sheltering in place right now. That is the reality in the world as I am recording this. So if you're finding this much later, then just know that this happened while we were all spending a great deal of time at home, learning to be creative in new ways. I chose to read Auralia's Colors with the small windows of spare time that I had available during the sheltering in place season. A lot of people had a lot more time than that on their hands. My job, as it turned out, kept going and in fact got busier because I've been teaching online. And teaching my classes at Seattle Pacific University online, that introduced a lot of new challenges for all of us. And while I greatly enjoyed it, and I've actually just wrapped up those classes for spring quarter 2020, it did mean that I was working more hours than ever. And most of them were like this, online, on camera, which was exhausting in ways I didn't expect. If you've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings, you know what I mean. It's a different kind of energy than being in a classroom. So when I had time to rest, the last thing I wanted to do was sit in front of a camera. But there weren't very many windows of time, and definitely not enough for me to apply myself to my usual discipline of writing. So I decided that the best way to use those fragments of time was to reconnect with some unfinished business, to finally read Auralia's Colors aloud, as I had always wanted to do. So here we are at chapter 6, and I'm going to dive back into it. In case you need a quick reminder, here's where we are. Auralia is growing up in the woods outside of House Abascar, where she is tuned into the world around her, mindful and attentive, and gathering all of the colors she can find. Speaking of gathering, she is very close to the gatherers. These are people that have been cast outside the safety of the walls of House Abascar to do hard labor there in harvesting and other kinds of work, in the hopes that they can earn their way back into House Abascar. Auralia loves the gatherers, loves their community in the wilderness, even though they are suffering tremendous hardships. She is skeptical of those who live inside of House Abascar and all of the compromises that are required to be acceptable in that house. And that includes going along with the King's program, a hierarchy of colors, where the general public, so to speak, of House Abascar are not allowed to wear or even own things of various colors. Those are enforced in separation so that only those who are in power can wear or manifest various colors. So it's a very dull place. This was all arranged by proclamation of the king, or rather his very controlling queen, in order to control the people, but also because she was selfish and wanted all of the glory for herself. And once she got it, she found it unsatisfying and disappeared. So now the king is left with a disgruntled people with this new code of the proclamation of the colors, which involves a promise that the people will get the colors back once the colors they have taken from the people have re-glorified or glorified, exalted House Abascar, the palace, the royalty, those in power. The promise was this would make the city like a jewel in the forest, and that has not come to be. Most of the colors are still buried in underground labyrinths. And so we left with some of those in power learning about this girl who is gathering all of these colors in the forest, including colors people have never seen before. Becoming concerned, becoming worried, wanting to make sure that she comes under the control of the house. When she is 16, she will be required to participate in something called the rights of the citizen, where she will pledge herself and her skills to the service of the house and the king. And she is not fond of this idea. Meanwhile, around the edges of things, there are monsters lurking. The people call them the Beastmen. And there's a long story about who the best Beastmen are and where they come from. We will get to that later. But they are not quite human. Something is terribly wrong with the Beastmen. And they are ravenous and predatory. They have more in common with wild animals of the woods than with human beings. And we will come to learn why they are that way. When last we checked in with the story, some of the gatherers had been attacked by Beastmen, and Auralia happened to be there, and so did an errand boy called the Ale Boy, who witnessed this attack and witnessed Auralia's brave confrontation with a Beastman. And then soldiers from House Abascar showed up, kind of resolved the situation, reprimanded Auralia, and went away. But one of the most important things about that encounter was that Prince Calraven, the son of King Calmarcus, saw Auralia for the first time. And that is going to prove to be important in the long arc of this story. All right, enough of the review. Before they restore our permission and before it is safe for us to return to the world outside, let us go a little bit deeper into this world. Chapter 6 of Auralia's Colors, Summoner and Stranger. Oh, by the way, one more thing. There has been a question about the images that I'm sharing as I read, and wondering if we're going to see actual characters in these images. And the answer is no, and here's why. While I would love to have a budget to hire an illustrator that could give us some graphic enhancement to these readings, so you wouldn't just be looking at me or at still images of environments. I've also had a strong feeling since before the book was published that I wanted to allow readers to imagine these characters on their own. Many is the time I see a film adaptation of a story, and it alters the way I see the characters in my mind's eye. It takes away from me what my imagination has done on its own. And I would like you to picture these characters the way you picture these characters, the way that these impressionistic descriptions prompt you to see them. That is a collaborative work. At the movies all the time, we're being told in slogans and advertisements that we are going to a place beyond imagination or whatever. And I argue with that, because I think at the movies we are usually being overwhelmed by others' imaginations. And a lot of movies give us very little work to do, very little imagining to do on our own. We're so busy receiving what's being thrown at us. One of the things I love about reading is that it turns the key on the engine of your imagination, and you start creating pictures of your own in conversation with the text. So I am quite content with these photographs, these sort of impressionistic landscapes that I've found that I'm able to share. I think they might give you more of a context, more of a sense of the kind of world I'm imagining, or the environments that I was hiking through or visiting when I was writing the story that were inspiring these scenes. So Some of these images you will have seen before in these readings. We are still in those territories, but I want the characters to come to life in your imagination. So that is why the illustrative aspect of these recordings is mostly photography of landscapes that are like the landscapes of the expanse of the area near House Abascar. All right, so now, without further ado, as they say, Chapter 6 of Auralia's Colors, Summoner and Stranger. A Vaughn emerged from the mist, head high like a conqueror. Each resonant step left its signature print on the ground, 3 reptilian toes in front and 1 wide claw in back. A rumble of displeasure rose from the gold-armored belly, up the blue-green arc of its throat, to blast in 3 voices from its nostrils. When it stumbled into a patch of muck, the creature dipped its mouthless muzzle into muddy soup and rested there, face half buried, drawing ground slime into its head. Teeth and tongues deep within worked noisily, separating leaf, water, soil, stone. Meanwhile, its rider sat proud as a jay and just as regal blue in her long uniform jacket. The outfit announced that the wearer was of a certain importance, but not a soldier. The high-collared design was certainly impractical. It took some effort for her to survey the woods around her. She pulled back the elaborate black tattooed mask and sniffed the air, then shielded her face again from the cold. Like all royal summoners, she depended on that striking, stern mask, a relic from the days of King Gearbaron, for a strong first impression. At the sweet pang of burning applewood, she turned sharply southward. Her spurs jabbed the soft seam between the Vaughn's natural gold belly armor and the tough green flesh of its back. The mount's head lurched up, nostrils blasted streams of mud to clear the way for whining voices. A lash of its tail overturned a tree to the right, smashed a bush to the left, then it resigned itself to the weighty march forward and pushed its way out of the thick patch of trees to enter a well-hidden clearing. A low murmur of voices rose, fell, and stopped altogether. A bonfire had settled into a mountain of smoky red and black so hot that the circle of gatherers around it kept their distance to avoid scorching their ragged cloaks. The summoner scanned the downcast faces, frowned on the bowing and the nodding and the strange spontaneous salutes, ridiculous attempts to appear well-mannered and cooperative. In no mood for prolonging her task, she cleared her throat, drew the skin mask back from her lips, and pulled from within her cloak a white scroll tied with a crimson ribbon. She snapped the red strand with a flick of her curled thumbnail and read quickly and colorlessly. Krog, Brown Jelter, Ambal, Warney, Echohawk, Joshurum, Nellaby. These are recognized by their appointed duty officers for their admirable efforts in daily assignments, and they are recommended to the king for restored residence and favor in the house. She spoke in a mechanical, halting way, breaking each statement into fragments. To claim this opportunity, they must appear before the king 6 days hence, bearing a sign of their pledge of service and the nature of their qualifications for labor. The king will hear each criminal's case and judge fairly whether they remain inside the wall's protection or return to the wild for another season. What? came an urgent voice. A glowering, broad-chested young man stepped forward. You did say my name, yes? Surely you said Radigan in them their names? The officer smiled. There is no such name on this list. Stand back. Radigan's face, even in the vermilion glow of the ember mountain, paled to ashen white. But you said the officer went on. She stared at the space above each individual's head as though looking down at such people would cause her to lose her train of thought. And those orphans, children of age, to be reviewed, include Auralia. The gathering unanimously gasped. Krog swung his hand around to stop up Warney's sob. Summoner, he said, there is no Auralia. Not for the rights of the privilege. Her name, it's on the list. She will attend. Krog shook his head. She's disappeared, good officer. Find her. We haven't seen her in many days. Probably snatched by a beastman, or stumbled into a hole, or the tree fell on her, or she got carried off by a devil wind, or stole away to try to get into some other house. No one who knows House Abascar, snarled the summoner, would think of living at any other house. True, Krog added. She could see him thinking as fast as he could. But Aurelia's never known what Abascar's like inside the walls. She doesn't know what she's missing, and you wouldn't want her shut inside anyway. He flicked himself in the temple with his thumb. She's not well in the head, you know. It's a sign of her affliction that she's run away like this. The gatherers kept their heads bowed, visibly colluding in Krog's desperate fiction. The summoner had never seen such a concerted effort to defy her. She might as well have come bearing news of a death sentence. We shall send an inquisitor to investigate Aurelia's disappearance. Be ready for him when he comes. He will expect answers. She went on to name the rest of the orphans who would be called before the king, but the gatherers appeared distracted, uncomfortable. Who was this girl they so revered? Where was she? And how did she elude all duty officers' attempts to apprehend her? Radigan, meanwhile, persisted in his pleas. My name is on the list, and you know it is, he snarled. He stepped between the gatherers and the Vaughn, speaking in a hushed and personal address. Don't pretend you've forgotten what I've done to earn it, either. It was all your idea, the things I've done to get this chance. I've helped you out, just like you asked. And you promised me you'd request an early pardon. You owe this to me. We cannot deny, thief, that your help was most enthusiastic and rewarding for us, she laughed, but you have served us so well it seems we will require your contributions a while longer before we are willing to send you back into Abascar. How do you know I won't lose my patience? And the summoner tugged at the reins, but the Vaughn's head had sunk completely beneath the mire in search of sustenance. The rider felt her grip on composure and civility slipping. She jerked at the leather restraints, and the Vaughn yanked its head out of the dirt, flinging sand and stones and painting both Radigan and the officer from head to toe in dripping sludge. At any other time, this would have resulted in the desperate sounds of gatherers trying to stifle laughter at seeing such a figure so offended. But deathly silence remained as they stared into bonfire embers. The Vaughn's three voices complained, dissonant, and it trudged off into the trees while its muddied rider plotted punishments for the obnoxious beast. The wet ground had only just closed the Vaughn's deep prints when the first currents of the cold night wind chased ashes into whirling dances about the bonfire coals. The gatherers all took one step closer to the embers, tightened their circle, and began to utter their frustrations. While it was as close to a gatherer tradition as anything might be to follow an officer's visit with self-interested complaint, this time there was only one name on their lips. Auralia's not made for housefolk. She'd never last inside. What? Why, today she sang the morning verse from the top of the stone tooth within view of the watchtower, even before the watchman took his place to sing it. If he could have reached her, he'd have smacked her. Warney dabbed at his eyes. Tears still fell from the empty socket behind his patch. Krog sometimes spies her asleep at the top of one of them giant evergreens by the lake. She likes to climb. Says she dreams about looking down and seeing the whole expanse spread out before her. What'll she get into inside the walls? I bite my nails all night wondering. They'll be pulling her off the palace spires. Krog nodded, tugged at the loose flesh of his neck. Found her with a yellow badger curled in her lap, I did. She was combing out its falling winter fur and stuffing it in her pockets. It could have killed her with a bite. She wanted the yellow off its fur. Krog took one end of the scarf he wore concealed under his heavy woods cloak and withdrew it before their eyes. I'm a liar if I'm not the only one in these here woods to have a yellow badger scarf. There's no housefolk, or I'd venture to say no magistrate neither, ever had one so bright. And, shh, put that cloth away, Lazika snorted so violently that things came out of her nose. If the summoner'd seen that, she would have taken you in for a good whipping. It's Auralia that's gonna get whipped, grumbled Yanni, his face as white as if he slept among his flour sacks. They threw me out here because they caught me wearing my favorite red hat in my own bed. I just wanted to keep my head warm. What I mean to say is, Aurelia's not going to live long before she starts cooking up colors inside Abascar's walls. We better hope she gets in trouble right away and tossed back out like a hunk of gristle, because she's the sort who might get sent to the dungeons if she has time to stir up something serious. You've all seen what she messes with, grumbled Hildy, the sad one. But me, I up and followed her one night when she was running away. I know what she does when nobody finds her. Warney's eye found Krog, and there was an unspoken question between them. Then Krog scowled. Oh, Hildy, you're full of Vaughn pooey. Last year, you told us you woke up on the floor because North children had come for you. You said they pulled you from your bed and tried to drag you into the woods. Turned out you were just sleepwalking and ended up stepping in a nest of stingers. So don't go expecting us to... No, I'd like to hear Hildy's story. Krog turned, and the assembly of nervous gatherers shifted away from the man who had spoken, for he was strange to them. He was small, in a simple green shift with a deep hood that shadowed a face like a pale moon. The firelight revealed his scowl. If Auralia is to come inside House Abascar, we should properly examine her. We should find out where she comes from and what she intends to do. He opened his hands in a sort of shrug. The more you can tell me what you know, the less I shall have to ask. That the summoner could have sent an inquisitor so swiftly, well, it astonished them all. Their eyes shifted between their visitor and Hildy, who was shaking as though the puddle she stood in had turned to ice. So, Hildy, tell me what you can. I have a Meticulous memory and my words within Abascar's walls do not go unnoticed, but I warn you, if a single word rings false, you will have a second inquisitor who is not nearly so kind as I am. The poor woman had never been the focus of so much attention, and she stammered as she spoke. At night, Auralia goes to the caves alongside the side of Deep Lake. Down in them cracks and crevices, down in them clefts and holes, she hides. She empties her pockets of seeds and leaves and roots and things and seeds and roots and leaves and things, drops them into pots of water she boils over a fire. Hildy's gnarled hands tugged at her long white hair and twisted it as she spoke. Over a fire. Can somebody else tell this story? Lamented little Abeldawn, pulling on his father's three-fingered hand. She don't talk so good. His father shushed him by pinching his ear. Wenji tried to take the story away from Hildy and carry it herself, but no one understood her, for she was swallowing a bun. Hildy continued. Auralia breathes in strange vapor from those concoctions, she does. Her eyes light up, her fingers wiggle, she dances around like a witch. And she chants, burst Wenji. Bun finished. She chants like a North child, and probably throws curses on our dreams. The robed stranger had begun to smile, more amused than interested. Noticing this, Krog barked, Close that mouth, Wenji. You have to lie down and rest just from walking 50 paces. You've never been as far as the lake. There were misty ghosts, though. Misty ghosts, said Hildy in a hush. Misty ghosts, blowing like a wind from the water. She lies down. Her eyes stare at the dark sky, and the stones round her shine and make a most alarming sound, breaking and cracking. And then she rises and grabs her brushes, and then she rises and grabs her brushes, shouted Abeldawn, whose father swiftly cuffed him on the shoulder. Hildy glared at the child and went on. She dips the brushes into the paints, and then she gets to coloring the stones all the way up and all the way down, all the way out to the edge of the water. Those stones are stained, I tell you, stained as red as blood. Maybe it is blood, murmured Mulla G under her breath. Krog scoffed. My little Auralia would never hurt nothing that lives. Warnie's response was no surprise. Gotta agree with you there. The visitor suddenly turned to Krog. You were the one who discovered her. The moon-faced stranger spoke so slowly and with such gravity that the words seemed new and magnificent as he voiced them. Tell me about that day. As the gathering groaned, weary of Krog's favorite tale, the old thief cleared his throat and spread his arms as if presenting a stage for a drama. It was by the river. The throne skull. Take me there. Warnie gave a whimper, which Krog quickly translated. We're only gatherers, sir. We're not supposed to leave the camps at night. Who do you think you're talking to? The stranger smiled again, this time with teeth. Crooked teeth, like a weasel's. You were once the midnight swindler. You're the kind of man who pays attention, who remembers things. Show me where you found her, and tell me every detail. I will reward you with... what does a convicted thief desire? A pardon? Does he want me to recommend him to Abascar's king as a helpful and cooperative man? Krog dropped to his knees and reached out as if to determine whether or not the visitor was real. Warnie stepped between them and grabbed the stranger's shoulders. As you can see, Krog's old and sore of leg. But I was there to see it all, and I'll take you straight to the spot where we found Auralia. I'll tell you the whole story, and about every day with Auralia since then." Krog rose to his feet with a roar and grabbed Warnie by the throat. At the same moment, everyone began talking about Auralia and pressing in closer to the stranger, who raised his hands laughing. "I can also spread word of an unruly and disrespectful mob." This had its desired effect, and a few moments later, it was Krog who led the nervous procession into the trees. At the river's edge, in the tall reeds where the muck moths flutter, Krog and Warnie bickered over the details of how they found the child. The stranger listened, but paced anxiously, examining the ground, dipping his fingers into the river, even tasting the water. When Krog paused in mid-story, enthralled by the vivid memories, the stranger said, "Tell me about the footprint." Sweat began to stream down Krog's face. He cast a pleading glance at his questioner, who ignored him and stared instead up the dark, flowing line of the throne skull. Housefolk did not smile upon talk of mysterious creatures, and if Krog even referred to the keeper, he might wake up in a dungeon cell. Warnie began to edge away from the conversation, quite prepared to run. "Sir," Krog murmured, each word a cautious step, "there's some who'd say things unlawful, things untrue. But I'm the king's good man, and I make no claim about the mark in which Auralia lay. But it was a humbling sight, a footprint or a hole dug to appear as such. And no creature had stepped upon her as she lay in the ground. No, sir. The ground was broken first, and she was put down in it, nice and easy, still wet from the river. Some folks would say more. Tell me, Krog, if the keeper were more than a figure in children's dreams, might this have been a sign of its emergence from the river?" The stranger stepped into the water and tilted his head, listening to it rush around his legs. Warnie had seen enough. He turned to head for the trees and found himself face to face with an Abascar duty officer who seized him by the ear. The old burglar's yelp interrupted the hushed conference by the river and startled the sleeping bushbirds, which clambered up the air and into the treetops. The officer, no doubt patrolling for beastman activity, wore full battle armor and cut a gleaming figure in the bow-broken moonbeams. His helm covered his face, muffling his outrage. "Who wants to be first to invent some wild explanation for why a bunch of criminals are whispering down by the river after the evening verse?" Warnie whimpered an unintelligible excuse, and Nellaby interpreted. "It was the Inquisitor who brought us here, sir. As you can see, we are only answering questions." "Show me this man you're talking about," said the officer. The wet grass around Krog's feet seemed to close its icy fingers around his ankles, binding him to the spot. Somehow he knew, even without looking, even as the others detailed frantic descriptions of the moon-faced stranger who had suddenly vanished, that he had been tricked. That the curious visitor had not been any royal official at all. There was someone else in the woods tonight who wanted to find Auralia. Someone unattached and dangerous. At the performance of the morning verse, a company of riders arrived escorting a true inquisitor. There would be no debate. This one was, as the stranger had promised, lacking in kindness. When the inquisitor returned to the king, he did not bring news of Auralia, for she remained invisible, lost without a trace. Instead, he returned with news of a meddler among the gatherers, a man full of questions and eloquent deceit. And the king put the watchman on alert. inspiring whispered reports that Shar Ben Frey, the man who had taught Calraven tales of the Keeper, the troublemaker who had been exiled for his beliefs, had been seen among the gatherers. And that is the end of chapter 6. I will read chapter 7 as soon as I am able. We'll see how the summer unfolds here as we shelter in place, as my hair gets longer and more unkempt, as the weather warms up, and as things get more and more difficult and dangerous for Auralia out there in the woods around House Abiscar.